It is I, Mysterio, Master of Illusion! Look what I can do! Oh, shit!
Hey, do you remember when Blizzard suspended a Hearthstone esports player for supporting Hong Kong during a live stream and also suspended 2 of the casters who were with him? Do you remember that? Do you remember that? Do you remember how Blizzard hid behind a vaguely written clause that allowed them to do it in a move that looked as if they were placating China, like so many corporations do, because they're desperate for the amount of money that the Chinese market makes for them? Do you remember? Do you remember? Do you remember when Blizzard waited a working week to respond to it and then put out some non-committal guff late on a Friday to avoid the news cycle? Do you remember? Do you remember? Huh, Craig? What's that? Oh, they announced Diablo 4 and Overwatch 2? Oh! All's forgiven then. Why were we ever annoyed? Huh. Let's talk about bots. Bots are nothing new. They've been a part of video games for exactly 155 years. They pad out a party in a multiplayer game that doesn't have enough players, like in Ubisoft's classic game that everybody loved, For Honor, where the existence of bots was essential at launch due to the fact that the game's online mode was very, very bad and you couldn't connect to real humans. The issue of bot-filled online modes might be fixed now, and this criticism could very well be outdated, but I'm buggered if I'm going to go back and play it to check. Bots can be sufficient allies for those who lack game-playing friends, or those who simply don't want to talk to real people, which I can understand. As discovered in Left 4 Dead, where teamwork is essential and AI-controlled partners do useful things, like refuse to pick you up after you've been downed when you really fucking need their help. In the Gears of War series, co-op AI partners have been incredibly useful for refusing to pick you up after you've been downed when you really fucking need their help. Basically, if you like lying around bleeding out on the floor, bots are there for you, like they've been there before. Bots are, generally speaking, not as good as human players. You can make a bot with as much accuracy and rapid-fire thinking as possible, but artificial intelligence is still rather simplistic in the video game space. They don't think creatively, they don't improvise, they lack important survival traits like fear that might otherwise prevent them from rushing headfirst into an uneven fight. One day, we'll all be dead and only the robots and the cockroaches will be left to fight for Earth's scorched remains, but right now AI just isn't good enough to tackle the Rochoidean uprising. On top of this, bots are usually handicapped by design to not outclass human players, which makes them comparatively easier foes in a game. Plus, you know, bots are just weird, inhuman, and behaviourally distinct as a result. All that said, bots can still be mistaken for human players when they're not obviously flagged as bots, and this has come up with a few important games lately. If a bot has been given a username similar to something a human would use, and there's no exterior indicator that the enemy on screen is anything but a fellow player, exactly how honest is that? Does it matter whether it's honest or not? And how does the presence of anonymous bots impact the game? Fortnite recently kicked off its massive Chapter 2 update boasting all manner of new features, new ways to progress as a player, a new map, new items, all of the new newness. The moment you as a player get into Chapter 2, you're plunged into the game from a cutscene rather seamlessly, dropped into the fresh map to get a first taste. And when I did this, I immediately noticed something was off. I was winning for one thing. Now look, I'm not terrible at Fortnite, but I'm not a particularly good player either, almost always surviving to the last quarter or so, but struggling a bit more from then on. In this very first game of Fortnite, I won it with startling speed, and the opponents I dispatched along the way were clearly not up to the task of putting me down. Wandering aimlessly, staring at me for a few seconds before shooting, if they did, and failing to hit me whenever they pulled the trigger, every foe I'd encountered in this initial Fortnite round not only behaved as if they'd never played Fortnite before, but as if they'd only just started playing video games at all. I could have met a few human players here. I could not have. I'll never know. They had usernames like any other player, so I could only guess based on their behaviour. In playing further, I've discovered the presence of bots has fundamentally changed the way I approach the game. Before Chapter 2, I'd play slow, careful and paranoid, always fearing a sniper's bullet from miles away or a devastating shotgun round every corner. Now I'm wandering around the map rather carefree, fearless of enemy resistance until most of the competitors have been eliminated and the truly dangerous foes are all that's left. Now admittedly what's also helped is skill-based matchmaking, which means my terrible ass is playing with other terrible asses. But that actually plays into the engagement factor we'll be talking about later, and nonetheless, just knowing that there are automated players in there that are stupid has had a profound psychological effect on the way I approach the game. Now in one way this is a good thing. You could argue that playing more aggressively is a positive trait, and of course the existence of easier opposition is giving the casual player a better shot at success, and likely way more encouragement to keep playing it. In another way, however, this is a somewhat cheap and deceptive way to retain an audience. Fortnite developer Epic Games has been a little bit shifty and not really talkative when it comes to the bot question, leaving the community to speculate, theorise and cook up conspiracies. One common question that's since popped up is this: how many of our kills in Fortnite have been truly earned in battle, and how many have simply been handed to us on a silver platter by subpar AI?
You thought you were playing with humans? 'Twas but another nefarious illusion by the mighty Mysterio! I've got nothing better to do! Whoa! Shit!
In a really interesting article on Fortnite bots, writer Carolyn Petit remarked on their eerie, almost horror-like presence in the game, discussing how their inhuman quirks, such as building single walls without rhyme or reason, makes them come off like alien creatures or mixed-up zombies. More crucially, she described the sense of doubt that bots have instilled in her experience. Now I score an elimination and I experience a feeling of deflation, she wrote. I don't understand what the bots are meant to accomplish. Their behaviour is too rudimentary to help me be better at the game in my encounters with human players. Is Fortnite just trying to stack the odds more in my favour to serve me a victory on a silver platter? I won't lie, even with bots, there's some kind of chemical satisfaction some part of my brain gets from scoring 4 or 5 eliminations in a single match. Something that was almost unheard of for me when all my opponents were human. But I don't want the game to give me these hollow ego boosts and empty victories. Yes, I'm terrible at the game. I'd love to get better, but I don't want you letting me win just so that I can feel better. And herein lies the rub. Many players have described feeling great about their performance in a game, only to become let down once they remember those kills were probably scored at the expense of dim-witted programs masquerading as people. And that's just those who even know about the bots. Fortnite isn't exactly upfront about their presence, and those casual players being encouraged by the easy victories likely aren't even aware of their existence. To them, they're just doing better at the game now. Now, many people might not have a problem with that. I mean, what they don't know won't hurt them, right? But I do feel, personally, that this is something of a grey area, and in a monetized game that relies on engagement to keep players invested, involved, and subsequently spending money, I have a bit of a problem with that. We'll talk more about engagement in a moment, but first, let's look at a slightly more dishonest game, one that really rubs me the wrong way, the piece of shit mobile dross that is Mario Kart Tour. Mario Kart Tour is worse than Fortnite when it comes to dressing bots up in human clothing. You see, Mario Kart Tour doesn't have an online mode at all, not yet. While one is planned in a future update, the current game simply pretends that every race you have is online. Every racer has a distinct username, some of them written in other languages to falsify a worldwide player base. Not once during the game does Mario Kart Tour itself tell you that, hey, you might think you keep winning races against other players, but you're not. It's a sham. A fucking lie. Just like Fortnite, this has a distinct impact on the way someone could interact with the game. I personally played it far longer than I might otherwise have done because I didn't know it was all fake. I thought I was doing pretty well at the game and winning felt pretty decent, so I kept doing it. At least until it was obvious that the game was total bullshit. Just try playing it with the fuck-awful motion controls that don't work. You'll still get into first place despite bashing into walls all the bloody time. If you don't know that it's all pretend times, you think you're winning, and if you think you're winning, you'll feel encouraged to keep playing. Let it ride, as they say. And the more you play, the more you're entrenched in that game's economy. And the more entrenched in the economy you are, the more tempted you may be to spend cash on it. Making this even more insidious is the fact that many of the bots use premium characters and unlockable cosmetics found in Mario Kart Tour's gamblerific loot boxes. Premium skins in games create a haves and have-nots economy. Players wearing them demonstrate to other players that spending money on the game is fashionable, socially acceptable, the normal way to play. This is something game developers deliberately do. Create a system where premium skins are status indicators and the default skins are to be looked down upon and mocked. Not only does Mario Kart Tour falsify a sense of success and player investment, it also lies about the popularity of its own microtransactions in doing so. Any game using secret bots that wear or use premium items is actively bullshitting about the desirability of its own merchandise, and that fucking sucks. It's the modern equivalent to that stereotypical old-timey scam of the snake oil merchant having a plant in the gathered crowd pretending to be an average customer and testifying to the product's success. And ultimately, all this comes down to that word I mentioned earlier: engagement. Mainstream video games aren't about entertainment anymore. If they were, more AAA video games would have actual content in them at launch. No, they're about engagement, and there is a distinct difference. Engagement has become one of the most important factors in modern media. It's become prioritized over actual enjoyment because it renders any interaction with a piece of media down to numbers on a page regardless of context. Whether someone is having fun or just repeatedly doing chores in a game doesn't matter, only the interaction. On YouTube, engagement is measured not just by views, but by comments and the like and dislike bar. Whether those comments are positive or negative doesn't matter, it only matters that there are comments. To the point where many commenters are trying to support their favourite channels by just leaving comments saying, "I have nothing to say, this is just for the engagement." Whether the video has more likes than dislikes doesn't matter. The algorithm treats them as identical. Groups that come together to mass dislike a video they hate actually only help those videos. The almighty algorithm doesn't care whether you like or dislike something. The almighty algorithm only cares that you're here. This is why those fucking auto-playing videos have become so popular on websites now. Because whether you pay attention or not to those videos is immaterial. You're just there as a number. Watch it, don't watch it, so long as it played on your browser, that's what made it a success, and how fucking soulless is that? This isn't exactly a new phenomenon either, since television ratings have boiled down audience responses to cold hard numbers for decades. Indeed, it was parodied years ago on the BBC sketch show That Mitchell and Webb Look. You know, that show that everyone remembers because of the baddies skit.
So it's coverage of idiots behaving idiotically for an audience of idiots.
Not just an audience of idiots. There'll be a lot of other people who flatter themselves they're watching with a sense of irony and in some way haven't been taken in.
And remind me, how do these ironic non-idiots show up in the ratings?
They show up the same, my friend. They show up just the same.
So it goes for Fortnite, Mario Kart Tour, any other game making it easier for players to keep engaging with their products. It doesn't matter if you're good at these games, if you're even playing them with any sense of skill or enjoyment, if you're playing it out of habit or addiction or genuine fun. You show up exactly the same, and so long as you're engaged, so long as you keep going back to the routine, that's all games need. This is why so many games have daily login bonuses, why there are perpetual repetitive events, why they feature so much grinding, why there's so much farming and crafting and resource collecting and monotonous bullshit. It's why even when you pay for things like XP and currency boosters to skip the grind, you're still encouraged to keep playing because those boosters often have expiry dates and you need to maximize your investment by playing as much as you can until the time limit on those boosters is up. How nefarious is that? None of it's designed primarily to entertain you, it's designed to encourage compulsive habitual play. You may get shallow endorphin rushes from positive feedback in these games, but the content is so repetitive and threadbare you're playing it out of sheer routine. The industry has a term for this cynical game design: hook, habit, hobby. This isn't me just guessing at the industry's motives, they have names for this shit. In our quote from Caroline Petit, she said she didn't know what the bots in Fortnite are meant to accomplish. It's easier to understand their goal when you remember one simple thing. They're not in the game for our benefit, they are in the game for Epic's benefit. Whenever something is implemented in a game that doesn't make much sense, especially when it fundamentally changes the game, the way that bots have in Fortnite, it's always worth asking what the corporation behind said game is getting out of it. The answer for Epic is simple. It's getting engagement. It's encouraging casual players to keep playing, and even experienced players are getting a basic, if very hollow, rush from increasingly impressive kill streaks. And whether you know your victory is hollow or not, you're a number that shows up to Epic exactly the same. You're engaged, and that's all that matters. If content is king, engagement is the emperor. And more, the emperor is seizing the king's land. Because engagement, as we've said, is all that matters. I mean, you go on Netflix and see how many times it skips the credits at the end, even if there's really good music that really fits the episode. And you've got to scrabble to stop it. And they've reduced the time it takes that you've got to scrabble and stop it. They're even talking about playing content now at 1.5 speed because they want you to just get through this stuff. Just consume and consume and consume. Don't think about what you're consuming. Don't enjoy what you're consuming. Don't take time to savor it. Just indulge. Just take it all in, because there's always more content to get to. It's so disposable now. I mean, look how important Game of Thrones was for 10 years. And then the final season happened earlier this year, and now everyone's just stopped. Just stopped. Because we don't have a chance to truly absorb the content, just engage with it. Just rant about it on social media for like a day, and then move on to the next content for like a day. Because there's so much, there's always more, and it never stops. Actual content, real entertainment has become more and more disposable, and I realise I've gone from talking about bots to something completely different. In fact, there's probably a whole other video we can do on the topic of just how disposable entertainment has become, and has been slowly becoming over years. It really is quite sad, but then who am I to talk? Within 24 hours you will all have forgotten that this video even exists, and so will I, and so will everyone. Thank God for me.
My name is Ninjas, the bad ninjas. How I use my sword, how it singes.
I'm Sid Zoolander, ZZ for short, you know I fight the corp, I'm the boss master. Listen up, you all, you're the boys brigade. When it's laser time, put on the 3D shade. Laser